Hi everyone, Jane here. Thank you for watching today and welcome to you all. Today I felt like having a play in my Khadi Fat Book, which I haven't used in quite a while, and I didn't really know what colours I wanted to use. So I had a quick flick through my colour palettes book and I came across this one which I thought went with the season but was a little bit different in that it had lots of these purples and pinks and reds in it. So I thought I'd use my Art Nouveau Kuretake Gansai Tambi watercolours today, and I was determined they were all just going to come from this palette. I did have the other one to start with, the other set, the 36 set, but once I'd started getting some out of here, I decided I wanted to use these colours if possible. So I made them match the colour palettes from the book. So I will list in the description box everything I've used, and I will list the colours there because I haven't got them to hand right now to be able to tell you exactly what those colours were. In fact, I don't think I even knew as I was pulling them out. I was matching them to the colour in the book rather than worrying about the colour name. So this Khadi Fat Book has got cotton rag watercolour paper in it. It is very thin paper, but this book you get a lot of pages for the money that it costs, and it's a really fun one to play around on. It's not to everybody's taste, but for me it's a really good one if you want to just have a play and you're not really worried about getting perfect results and you just want to get your mediums out and have a go. Then it's a really nice one because you feel no pressure to be precious with it because it's got so many pages in it that you really can turn over and start a new one. So I am just going with circles. Circles are one of those things that I return to, like many people, again and again, as they are just so joyous. They're easy to do. So I wasn't trying to do anything too complicated today. I didn't really have in my head particularly what I wanted to do, although I did know that I wanted to use some new collage tissue that I had. So I was, at this point, this was just always going to be the background for my main image. And so I wasn't really overly worried. I just wanted to have a play around with the paints, and these paints are really fun to play with, I find, because you get nice big pans, you can really get big brushes in there. And I went for my really soft brushes. They're not my favourite when I'm doing things like actually colouring in images with watercolour, but when I'm doing big washy backgrounds and big bold marks, they are really fun. They hold a lot of water, a lot of paint, and you can really have good expressive marks with them. So I'd put the colours down and then I went back in whilst it was all still wet. I hadn't dried it, just to add some extra colour on top. Then I let it dry. Once it had dried, it does dry slightly paler. Today it didn't actually seem to dry as pale, but I wanted to add some deeper colours, some more sort of harder marks. I would say, I can't think of the proper word, but more bolder marks onto the circles. So I went in with some Neocolor 2s and also some of the Arrtx acrylic markers, because I've got more a nice range of colours. Also, this paper, it's quite rough textured, and I do sometimes find I do use my Posca pens in a little while on it, but because the Posca pens have got that sort of bullet nib, and I find that sometimes the paper they don't work as well on this paper because it tends to sort of scratch them up somehow. Or they scratch the paper up. I've never quite worked out which way around it is. But these brush markers seem to not be affected as much. I wouldn't go too mad with any sort of fibre tipped pen on this paper because it has, like I say, it has got that texture that means that it could sort of be damaging a little bit to the tips of your pens. So at this point I was just going in, and when I say this was, art journal play, it really was. I did not have an idea of what marks I wanted to make or what colours I wanted to put where. I was just going with the flow. So initially I put all the Neocolor 2s down just as crayons, and I was thinking I was going to stick to that. But then when I did these little sort of arches, would you call them? Bumps. I'm not sure what you would call them, but once I'd done them, I felt that they needed to have the colour drawn out of the actual lines, which is one thing you can do with your Neocolor 2s because they are a water soluble crayon. So you can leave them as they are, or you can water them out. And you, as you can see here, you get a different look. Once I'd done the filling in those shapes, I sort of felt like I wanted to activate all of the lines that I'd put down. So that is what I'm doing here. And as I was going around, I was thinking some of these lines aren't moving, and then I remembered that they were actually the acrylic markers, because obviously your acrylic markers are a permanent product, so as soon as they've gone down and dried, they're not going to move, which, you know, is something to be aware of in case you're thinking you wanted to move lines. But if you want something that's then going to stay put, they are ideal for that as well. So I'm just bringing out all of those different marks. And then I wanted to just, having done that, I then went back over and added a bit more in. But that's the joy of playing in these sorts of journals and these sorts of sketchbooks that are very, very low pressure. At this point, I knew that we needed some contrast in terms of like black and white, and so I went in with a range of different white acrylic markers. Now this is a really chunky white Posca marker. It's really good fun for making really bold marks, and I really enjoy using it. But then I wanted to make some more subtle marks, some sort of smaller marks, and so I'm going in with the, I think it was the 5M Posca pen, or it might be, no, probably the 3M. It was the 3M. That's the 3M. I've got 3M there, the 1M. Don't think I used the 1M in the end, but this is the Copic Acrea. Now this gives you a really fine line. This is more on a par with the 1M Posca in terms of the size of the nib. And again, I was trying to be a little bit careful because I was aware that I was having to sort of activate the paint because the paper was sort of taking that paint out of the nib quite quickly. So it had to keep being reactivated. Then I wanted to go in with a little bit of black. So I'm getting the opposite sort of contrast, and I'm going in with, I think it was the 3M in the black. I have to say, when I want a really fine line with my acrylic markers, I tend to head towards the Copic Acreas. If I want a sort of like a midline, oh no, this wasn't black, this was gold. I wanted a bit of gold, and then I go in with the black. But this was the 3M in the gold, so I was right on the size, just not the colour. So I tend to use the Copic Acreas when I want a really fine line, and then when I want a thicker line, I go in with the 3M from the Poscas. I have got some 5Ms, but they're more in different colours. The acrylic markers I do use the most are the white, the black and the gold in any range. I'm not a big silver fan for some reason. I don't know why. Because I wear silver jewellery. This is the irony. But I like gold when I'm adding it to projects. In terms of colourful ones, I use the Arrtx markers the most, because I like the colour selection that they provide more. I'm not really overly fussy about the sort of tips of the pens, and whether they're a brush mark or whether they're a bullet tip or a chisel tip. For me, you know, you use the style that suits you and the way you create. So I'm going in with the black Posca pen, adding a little bit. I didn't add too much black, I have to say, because I knew that the collage tissue that I was going to use was going to add that real pop of black contrast. So there's what I've done so far. Now here is the collage paper. Now this is the brand new selection from Dina Wakley. I have a lot of Dina Wakley's collage tissues. I do really enjoy them. I don't use them as much as I should, but they're there and they don't go off. You know, they're not going to go manky or hard or need chucking away. They're there, they're just going to last forever. And I like her tissue because it blends really nicely. I love the images, and I love in particular the face images that she produces. So this new pack is all faces. And I wanted a really bold, striking one with a lot of black in it. So I went with this girl here. I think it's a girl, it could be a man actually, you know, either way. This person with this really striking black hair, because I knew that would be really bold against that background. The background is quite busy, so I wanted something that would stand out really well. Now what I am doing is I'm using water to cut, in inverted commas, the image out. I'm actually tearing it out by adding the water, and I add it on the back because it soaks in easier on the back, because that's not the side with the ink and the print on. I add the water, makes it give you a more feathered edge. And if you have a more feathered edge, then when you stick the image down, you are going to get it to blend into your background a lot easier. If you use scissors, you get a really blunt sort of edge. As you'll know, if you're cutting out any image, and I say this a lot when I then add, you know, pen around the edge, because I don't like that blunt sort of white raw edge. You don't get that in this way because you've torn it, it's feathered it, it's not got that blunt edge. It does take a little bit of time, and I added the water all the way around, and then I was having to add extra in because as it was taking me so long to go around that it was drying by the time I was getting to it. So there is my image all torn out, and I'm going to use the Liquitex matte medium, the professional one, to stick this down. So even though in the background I have got water reactive products, it wasn't too bad because I think a lot of them have been heat set at various times, and because a lot of them have been watered out, they weren't reactivating that much. And I just stick some, so I put the matte medium on the page all across the back of my image. Sometimes if you find that some of the white parts of that collage tissue I was showing, you maybe just need to add a little bit more of your medium to make sure it is totally covered, because sometimes that makes a difference. And then I'll seal it in with some more of the matte medium. Now, I didn't want a floating head. You might want a floating head. I didn't want one. So I just drew a very vague outline, and I quite liked it because I felt that where the pattern from the background was coming through was looking a bit like a jumper pattern. Now, some people don't like the pattern or the colours coming through on things like faces. I don't mind that. I quite like it because it makes it a part of the whole. But if you wanted to, you could have painted white paint on the back of the face so that when you stuck it down, you could then colour the face in if you wanted, so it wasn't the background showing through. Then I've added this sentiment from Lemon Creation onto the page, exist loudly, as many people should. And I then thought I would want some more white going round, and added a bit of extra to the jumper to make it more of a feature. And then I thought I'll add highlights to the eyes, and then I added it to the lips. And I decided afterwards it made it look like they had a funny tooth just sticking out. So I decided to get rid of the highlight on the lips, and I was much happier with that. And whilst I was there, I added a bit to around the sentiment. So thank you ever so much for watching today. If you have enjoyed this video, do please give it a thumbs up and hype it if you are able to. It doesn't cost anything, and it helps smaller channels to get seen better. And at the end of the video, you will see a list of my lovely super supporters who are my members, and I will add information in the description box about how you can do that if that's something that interests you. So until the next time, thank you ever so much for watching. Bye bye.